Finally allowed some media at Viking OTAs, which are underway. Turns out no rookies are starting. So what's up with that? Let's talk about it here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Today on the show, we got a little OTA update for you. There are some things to talk about with OTAs. There's not a lot. You can't really discern a lot from a distance. You kind of, but what reporters have mentioned about who's where on the depth chart and stuff is interesting. But most of the show will actually be talking about Brian Asamoah. We'll get to that later. But first, we'll give you the OTA update. This comes from Kevin Seifert of ESPN, Chad Graff of The Athletic mostly, Judd Zolgad a little bit. But basically, we know some interesting depth chart things. I'll start on the offensive line, which everybody wants to know. So there's been a little bit of speculation about what's going to happen at center. Should there be a competition at center? I've kind of been saying I wish there were a competition at center. The draft did not really fall that way. Well, it did. They could have, but they chose Ed Ingram instead. And doesn't seem like they're putting him at center. He is with the second team. It sounded like Wyatt Davis with the third team, and the first team is a rotation between Chris Reed and Jesse Davis. This is mostly that's all at right guard. Garrett Bradbury starting is on the first team at center, uncontested. Nobody's rotating or taking snaps with him. So I'm not really sure what that's all going to shake out as. We've got a long way to go, right? But we now understand the pole position. And the thing about it is, like, all the rookies didn't take first team reps. Lewis Cine didn't. Andrew Booth didn't. Lewis Cine should absolutely start. Like, that should definitely have. If Lewis Cine can't outdo Cam Bynum in camp, that means two things. One, that's kind of concerning because he's a first round pick. Two, he shouldn't start anyways, just because he's a first-round pick, right? I saw somebody say that, like, hey, if you're not starting your first-round pick, you're doing something wrong. Just put him in there. It's like, well, he's not better than Cam Bynum. He shouldn't play over Cam Bynum, right? If Cam Bynum is better than Lewis Cine, Cam Bynum should play. And we can be concerned about why Cam Bynum is better than Lewis Cine, but that, is a question with a lot of answers. It could be Cam Bynum is totally going to have a breakout year. Maybe we just didn't know that, and whatever. Like, same thing happened with Laquan Treadwell and Adam Thielen. And in that case, it meant both. Laquan Treadwell was bad. Adam Thielen was good. So it's all kind of, we just have to take that situation sort of case by case. But basically, in the first few days of OTAs, rookies, I kind of agree. Zimmer did this. Sounds like O'Connell's going to do it too. I agree. I actually don't know of any teams that don't do this, except, I mean, look, if you pick a guy like first over, if you have like a Trevor Lawrence, he's going to be your starter, that kind of thing. But for the most part, rookies should kind of have to earn their keep. I believe even Trevor Lawrence started on the second team to begin OTAs, and he won the job easily, but he should have to, like, proactively do that. And so that's why I'm okay with not having rookies be in the start. Like, Lewis Cine will overtake Cam Bynum eventually, unless he's not better than Cam Bynum, in which case he shouldn't start over Cam Bynum. And we can be concerned. We can talk about why that is, what happened, blah, blah, blah. Where was I wrong? Because that would make me very wrong. And we can all do that, all that reflection in that case. We'll cross that bridge if we come to it. But for now, you shouldn't think that, Jesse Davis and Chris Reed are competing for the right guard. What about Ed Ingram? I thought he was supposed to start. There's a long time for that to play out. It's just that the competition has to go that way. Other interesting things on the OTAs. Their base package had Armon Watts starting, which the base package, which base 3-4, so 3 down linemen, 4 linebackers, counted both Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter as quote-unquote linebackers, but you're probably going to have 4 people hand in the dirt every play, or 4 people, I should say, on the line of scrimmage every play, because they might be in 2-point stances or whatever. Some 4 people on the line of scrimmage every play, if not 5 people with Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter, whatever. Like, that's how 3-4s tend to work. And so you would count Danielle Hunter as a quote-unquote outside linebacker, but he won't play like a coverage role or anything like that very often. Maybe in fire zone contexts or in like very conservative spot drop zone sort of concepts and stuff. You do that, but you won't ask him to, man up on a tight end or anything like that, or at least not often. You shouldn't be doing that. But that leaves this kind of unoccupied, call it 3 technique spot, where in a 3-4, you kind of have your big boy nose. That'll be Dalvin Tomlinson, I think. And then you kind of have other in between the tackles linemen that in a 4-3 would play a 3 technique. This would be where like a Sheldon Richardson would fit, right? But you have Harrison Phillips and Armon Watts both playing there in the base package. I guess that would be Armon Watts. It could be James Lynch by the end of the camp. It could be somebody else. It could be Jalen Twyman if he like blows up and it turns out he was really good and he just got shot. Like, it could be a bunch of people, and I think that's actually probably a pretty open spot if somebody really shows that at camp. But for now, that's Armon Watts, and then he's the guy that comes off in nickel. So the nickel would be, I've joked that it's like a Zadarius Smith 3-2-3-5. So like whatever you call Zadarius Smith, call him an edge rusher, call him a linebacker. I would prefer to call him an edge rusher. I think that's a more apt description of his skill set, but some 3-4s refer to that as a linebacker. Call it whatever. That's semantics. It's him, 2 down linemen, Danielle Hunter, 2 off-ball linebackers. I don't care if you call that a 4-2-5 or a 3-3-5. I could not care less. That's going to be, I think, the true natural state. That's going to be, I would call the quote-unquote base package for the Vikings, is those 6 and 5 defensive backs. And who those 5 defensive backs are will also rotate a little bit. You'll have like a Cam Dantzler, Andrew Booth rotation, and I think camp will determine the ratio, but I don't think you'll have one of those guys be fully benched and relegated to a backup spot unless one of them super explodes in camp. And then you'll have sometimes Chandon Sullivan will be the 5th D-back. Sometimes it'll be Cam Bynum, I think. Sometimes it will switch out. Be Brian Asamoah will be like another linebacker. Like there will be kind of weird sub package things. That's what I think will happen there in terms of like the nickel package. So that's what we kind of learned in OTAs. Also, Eric Kendricks didn't participate. I think that was the only significant non-participation news. Also, Harrison Smith didn't participate, but he's having a baby, so congrats to Harrison Smith. And Eric Kendricks like did a little work or something, or he would like it seemed like there might be an injury, but there might not be an injury, or it might just be like a veteran thing. I don't know. Kevin O'Connell is going to speak, I think, today on Wednesday, and we'll get more answers about that. I don't really know what the deal is there, but we'll get more info about that. And if we have to panic, we'll do it tomorrow. And then that kind of leads me, I guess, to the backup linebacker, which is Brian Asamoah, who I want to spend the rest of the show talking about. So we'll do that right after we talk about Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the planet. It is delicious, sweet, and candy-like, covered in 100% chocolate. And now they have what I've been pushing, their Built Puffs, which are super, super good. Tastes like a marshmallow covered in chocolate, like some kind of, it's like Peeps that are good. And it's not going to knock you off the wagon. It's like 100 and some calories, low sugar. One of these Built Puffs, their new birthday cake flavor. You heard that right. Birthday cake, marshmallowy stuff. It's insane. It tastes like something super indulgent and guilty. And it's not guilty at all. There's like 9 grams of sugar in that. And that's like as much as it gets. So whatever you buy there, you can also go for their classic flavors like chocolate peanut butter or chocolate caramel or whatever, the classic raspberry. Whatever you get, you can go to built.com to get it, and you can enter promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15. You can get 15% off of your order. It's promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. Thank you so much, everybody, for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Rest of the show, I want to talk about Brian Asamoah. I'm going to do a little bit more of a deep tape breakdown, which I think for me, visuals help a lot if you need that. I have an article that goes over a lot of the same points, but with like evidence and clips and stuff. Obviously can't do that in an audio medium, and I'm not going to try to post proprietary tape on YouTube. So we'll keep that to the article. You can find it on my Twitter, Luke Braun NFL. I'll probably tweet it out sometime on Wednesday. But I'll explain the points the best I can. So Brian Asamoah, I guess what you need to know about him is that he is very rangy. He is very small, he's very undersized, and he is a block avoider. Those are basically the three things. That makes him very good in coverage. It makes him very bad in physicality, goal line situations and stuff. It makes him he just doesn't have the oomph that you would want, but he can go kind of sideline to sideline, and so that's the kind of player that he is. We'll get into a lot more detail there. But I think that the thing that I really want you to understand about Brian Asamoah is his range. I think that is what defines him as a player, is that he can go from point A to point B, and point A and point B can be very, very far apart, and he can be expected to make it there. To a point, and I said something similar about Lewis Cine, and I think they share this trait. There's one play that I think exemplifies this really well against Baylor, which is an insane game. He was flying against Baylor. Like, he has some unreal highlights that I guffawed at audibly and ruined a meeting my girlfriend was having in the same room. So in college, the hash marks are a lot further apart than in the NFL, you might notice. And the real change that has is that a college play can start a lot closer to one sideline than the other, obviously, which means that if you are, say, lining up on the boundary side of the field, the closer to the sideline side of the field, and the play goes to the field side, there's a lot more ground that the offense has to work with, and you're going to have to make up ground, and you're going to have to make up more ground because there's so much more space that they're going to go do. So they were up against Baylor. Baylor runs a toss to the outside, which is a very, very lateral play. There's a lot of horizontal space, and it starts so far from the sideline. Asamoah had to get basically to the other side around, between the hash and the numbers, I think was around where he made that tackle, and he made it for a short gain, maybe a loss. And covering that much ground, which, by the way, you won't ever have to do in the NFL, because the NFL, a play can't start that far over, is unbelievable. It's just unreal. And there are all sorts of plays. This is something Oklahoma asked him to do a lot, was man up on the running back, or be, if they were running man match terminology, which because of Zimmer is still the thing that I'm the most familiar with, the way I have to describe plays. If he was the hook player and he had man-to-man on the 3, which is essentially fancy words for linebacker man-to-man on the running back. But that means that he covers the guy in the flat no matter what. And there are some coverages that have adjustments to make a linebacker not have to do that. Oklahoma never utilized that tool. They just said, no, you got him. And so if a linebacker is doing a swing pass and going out to the flat, Asamoah could always chase that down and attack it. And he actually ended the Cotton Bowl that way. The Cotton Bowl was a total blowout, but he had the last play of the game that stopped them from getting a consolation score. That was in 2020 against Florida. So that is a really cool ability that he has. That's something Anthony Barr's job used to be. And Anthony Barr did it 30 pounds heavier, which is what made him a first-round pick. And Asamoah's a third-round pick. But that is a very cool thing to kind of have on your tape to show I can do that. So range, awesome. That's the headline. The other headline, I guess, well, let's talk about his coverage, and then I'll talk about the physicality later, because we'll keep with the positives. Because coverage, basically every scouting report on Asamoah, which was the basis of my knowledge of Asamoah when he first got drafted. When he first got drafted, go back and listen to my day 2 recap, and you'll hear me talk about Asamoah. And my thing was, okay, he's a block avoider. He's not a physical guy. He's not a stack and shedder. He's an avoider, but he's a really rangy coverage guy. And so he's kind of like Chazz Surratt, but he can get off blocks. I find myself completely emboldened in that take, and the scouting reports nailed it. So I feel like whatever I said on day 2, I don't really take any of it back. So that's always nice. I think that's the first player I've gone down the list. It took me till the 4th guy that they took before that was the case. But coverage-wise, what excites me about him in coverage is there's kind of 2 things. His job in coverage was very often zone matchy, kind of. And I wasn't really looking close enough to know if Oklahoma was playing zone match or spot drop zone. Either way, his footwork and stuff would work for either. But basically, a lot of his opponents would use mesh and crossers, and sort of the idea is have a guy enter a zone and then leave a zone, and it makes it really difficult to execute picking a guy up and passing a guy off, and just make the defense do that a lot. Eventually they'll screw up, there'll be a window, and it's the quarterback's job to find it. A lot of offenses, West Coast offenses, a lot of college offenses are structured that way because young players will screw that up all the time. And lo and behold, Oklahoma did. Oklahoma's defense was really, really sloppy and had all kinds of problems. You probably remember it from some of those games. But Asamoah was not the problem. Like, he was really, really good at that. And honestly, when you focus in on him, you start to see kind of a few things. He is very aware, right? If he's going to back off into one crossing route, he's going to take it, and he's going to pass it off when he's supposed to pass it off, and he's going to know that another crossing route is coming that doesn't catch him by surprise ever. He can see it, and then he can go pick it up, and he's very efficient about that is the other thing. There is very little wasted motion in his footwork. When his feet are going one way or strafing, when he's backpedaling or anything like that, a lot of younger players will kind of get smaller, choppy steps when they have to go from like a back pedal to a strafe, when they're going backwards to when they're going side to side. They have to sort of get really small and choppy, or they'll just come to a stop entirely, and it's a clunky, not very smooth transition. Asamoah's transitions from going one direction to another are very smooth. I don't want to use the word change of direction because that implies like a 3-cone agility thing, which isn't really what I'm talking about here. He has a lot of explosion though. Like, he can go from 0 to 60 very quickly. That's part of why he's so rangy. But this is more of a technical thing. This is more of a, like, you can see how much he's rehearsed it. And kind of coming into the NFL with that in his pocket ready to deploy is really, really nice. And then knowing how to use it, you get a lot of reps where he's doing a jazz square almost, where he's like, okay, back up, take the crosser, go to the left with it, and then go forward, and then go back to the right with the other crosser, and and at no point is a throwing window conceded, and that's an NFL caliber talent, and that rules. And I'll talk about why I don't see him as a starter in a second, but because of those skills, because of his range, because of his coverage ability, he is, I think, right now, if you had to play a game tomorrow, he's a backup linebacker. Put him on the roster. If somebody gets hurt, he can walk in and you can live with his skill set. And the reason you can live with his skill set is because those things are positives. And despite what else is negative, and I'll get to it, but despite what else is negative, those positives make it so that if Eric Kendricks goes down and isn't healthy, which, I mean, shoot, he's missing OTAs, maybe there is something there. I feel okay about Asamoah filling in for a few weeks while you get your bearings. And I feel okay about him coming in and being a sub-package player, right? If you need a third linebacker because they've got 3 tight ends on the field, but you're worried about also maybe they do a passing pattern there, Asamoah can be maybe that third guy. So I feel pretty good about all of that stuff. I want to get to the physicality part, because that's the major negative, is that he's small, he's undersized, and he plays like he's undersized. And I want to explain kind of what that means and why that stuff bothers me. And I want to talk about Chazz Surratt a little bit. I talked about him a little yesterday, but I want to talk about Chazz Surratt, who I've seen a lot of people say, oh no, he's Chazz Surratt 2.0 and stuff. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. We'll get to it. First things first, though, let me talk to you about a good old Gramble. Look, I'm not high on the Vikings this year. Most of that's a Kirk Cousins take, but you don't have to agree with me on that. And if you disagree with me so hard, why don't you put a little money on it? I did. I put some money on the under 8.5 of the Vikings. I challenge you, all right? If you put money on over 8.5 wins for the Vikings in 2022, which you can go to BetOnline right now and you can do that, and they end up cashing the over and I lose money, I want you to blast me with those screenshots, all right? Screenshot your over 8.5 win tickets, and if they cash that over 8.5 wins and they win 9 games, which I don't think they're going to do, and if you're right and I'm wrong, blast me with it, okay? Do it. I challenge you. I'll deserve it. I'll deserve the pile-on. You can bet on anything at BetOnline. You can bet on basketball or hockey playoffs, WNBA. You can even play your favorite Vegas casino games over there. Just head on over to betonline.net, gramble on whatever it is you can find. All things odds, news, scores, props, whatever. That's betonline.net, where the game starts. One last thing with Brian Asamoah, and it's his physicality. Let's talk about this. So the short answer here is Brian Asamoah does not have NFL caliber physicality. There are a few reasons for this. One is that he's just undersized. He's 226. That's really small for a linebacker. That's closer to a safety. People at OTAs, reporters at OTAs were like, man, Asamoah and Lewis Cine look like about the same guy. Like that's concerning, right? Cine is a safety, and Asamoah is a linebacker the size of a safety. And that size helps him be faster. So it helps him with range and coverage, and a lot of his positives come out of being small for a linebacker means he's fast for a linebacker. And being fast for a linebacker is pretty sick sometimes. Like that rules when you have to carry a tight end up the seam, or when you have to get from one hash down to the flat, like that is awesome. The people design plays with the understanding that a linebacker is only so fast, and when the linebacker is faster than you expect, it ruins a play's whole design, and you don't even have to play well. You just have to be like as athletic as you are. All that stuff rules. The cost is when he is in an engagement that he has not been able to avoid. When a blocker gets his mitts on him, it's over. He will just be eliminated from the play, totally erased. So it's not that easy to get your mitts on him, and I think that's what makes him like a viable player that you can put on the field. But once you do have your mitts on him, there's no shedding. There's no stacking and getting off of it. All he can do is essentially backpedal and back up and cede ground until he's far enough away from you that he can try to avoid you. And block avoidance is his preferred strategy. But let me talk a little bit about physicality. So when you're a lineman, your goal often will be to take a guy and move him to somewhere else. This shouldn't be news to anyone. And when that's really, really easy, A, you're just letting a guy have a really easy job. But B, sometimes guys can get really hyped on that. There's a play from the Baylor game. It's late in the Baylor game. He had already been really dominant for most of that game, so it didn't have a huge impact. But you could really see a lineman basically got his mitts on him and walked him back 20 yards. I mean, and I'm not exaggerating. It was 20 yards, and it's a miracle that dude didn't end up on his ass, which has happened a few other times. Guys will be on top of him. Happened once in that Cotton Bowl against Florida. Happened once against Oklahoma State in 2020. I think that was 2020. To his credit, I think this problem was worse in 2020 than it was in 2021. This last year, it seemed like he maybe got a little bigger. So that's nice, but it was still a problem. And it essentially makes it so the dynamic on any run play or any screen play or short pass or whatever, anything where he's not executing coverage concepts, is he just can't let you get your hands on him. If you're an offensive lineman and you get your hands on him, it's over. And so he has to avoid that at all costs, which makes him a very avoidant blocker. And he has a lot of ways to avoid. Kwesi kind of alluded to this in his press conference, where he kind of said, well, he's small, but can he get off blocks? And we think he can get off blocks well. And I think a better way to put it is that he can avoid blocks. And I think that's what Kwesi was talking about, that he can stop an engagement from happening. So if you're a lineman, you're coming up, you're trying to get your hands on him, he'll use legit pass rushing moves. Like it looks like he's taken days of practice with the D-line coach because he's got a two-hand swipe. Like he's swimming. He's like dipping and ripping people, but he's doing it at 10 yards off the ball, which is a little bit weird to look at. But it works. A lot of the time it works. It gets you past your blocker, and then suddenly you've penetrated the play and you've done something disruptive. And so that his biggest weakness can turn into a strength. And I think that's why the Vikings were excited about him, because, hey, you get blown up a lot, and he gets blown up a lot. Like I have a bad physicality folder that's like half the size of Chazz Surratt's, and Chazz Surratt's is huge. So let me talk about Chazz real quick. So Chazz is Brian Asamoah, but like fully min-maxed. For the olds, or non-gamers, min-maxing is a gaming strategy where you would design a character where you maximize some statistics, but usually you have to minimize others, so you decide which ones are unimportant and minimize those, decide which ones are important and maximize those. And it's like taking things to a huge extreme. And Chazz Surratt is taken to a huge extreme. His physicality is frequently embarrassing. I mean, he'll have 10 plays a game where he'll just get beaten up by a guy. And every fullback, every tight end kills him. He can get blocked out by tiny H-backs. He got pancaked by a quarterback once, and that quarterback was De'Aaron King, who's like 5'11", 200 pounds. that for me was a total deal breaker, and that's kind of why I hated that pick. And yeah, he had good coverage and stuff, and it seemed like he had reasonable instincts, but it's like he can't get past anybody, and he didn't have that shedding ability, that avoiding ability, I guess I should say, that Asamoah has. So Asamoah is like a responsible Chazz Surratt. Chazz Surratt was an irresponsible guy to put on your team. All of that is to say, Asamoah has to play a fairly disadvantageous game. You can't exist for a whole football game without an offensive lineman ever getting a good engagement on you. Like, eventually they're going to get you. And when they do, you're going to get washed out of the play, and that's going to be a problem. So Asamoah cannot be on the field without being a problem on some level of snaps. He will also be an asset on many snaps. And I think that is the package of a backup linebacker. I think if you are hurt, if you have a hurt linebacker, your room is depleted, and you got to put a backup in, I would love for that backup to randomly be an asset sometimes. And understanding that he's a backup, I'm way more okay with him being a liability sometimes. So Asamoah, right out the gate, backup linebacker. That's pretty good. At pick 66, I expect a little more. I had him as the last linebacker I would have taken at 77 pre-draft. That's where I had him on my board. You can go, it's all tweeted and stuff. It's all out there. So you can go look at where I had guys on my board. My board, I had him, I would have picked him at 77, but I would have picked like 4 other linebackers ahead of him at 77. But if he was the only guy there, I still would have taken him because I thought picking a linebacker in the 3rd round was a good proposition. But I certainly wasn't as high on him as I was on Nakobe Dean. I didn't really understand the extent of his injury stuff, so sure, like whatever, I get it there. Or a number of other guys, bigger guys like Leo Chenal out of Wisconsin and stuff, because I wanted a different kind of prototype of linebacker. But for this speedy sideline to sideline coverage guy, Asamoah certainly is one. But at 66, what I see is a backup that needs to either do a lot of bulking up but not lose speed, which is difficult. He needs to learn how to be physical despite being small, which is difficult. Or he needs to just be a successful linebacker despite being small, and he just needs this avoid every block game to work out, which is difficult. So I think his path to being a true starter is really, really hard. And I don't really see him achieving that. I see him being a backup, a rotational guy, a guy with a role on the team, and that's cool. And he's not going to get cut in 2 years or anything like that. I would be very surprised by that. But I don't really see him being the Eric Kendricks heir apparent or the Jordan Hicks heir apparent or anything like that. I see him kind of topping out as a sub-package guy. And I think at 66, that's a reach. So I'm not in love with the pick, but I would have taken him like 20 picks later. So it's not a huge deal. And I think what he offers is pretty clear. And in some ways, really exciting. And I think you can absolutely get excited about some of the explosive stuff that this guy can do. You can get excited about having a good coverage linebacker, which I think most people kind of understand. Like, hey, coverage more important than the run. Great. He's good at the more important thing. Be excited about that. That's totally fine. But there will be a lot of times where you just don't want this guy on the field. And against certain, like if it's 13 personnel and short yardage, I ain't putting Asamoah on the field. And I'm not putting Chazz Surratt on the field. I'm not putting Troy Dye, who apparently slimmed down at OTAs, on the field. And they have a lot of those guys. I don't think they're going to roster all those guys, but they have a lot of them in the building right now. And I think that is what makes it disappointing, I guess. But don't take that as me saying I hate the player or anything like that. I don't know. I would have waited a little longer before drafting him. I don't know. I would have drafted him a little later is all. And that's a pretty lukewarm take, but that's what it is, right? I'll talk to y'all tomorrow. I think I'm going to have a history story tomorrow. I haven't done one since earlier in the week, so we're going to do that. I will see you all then. And as always, Skol.